Welcome to Tartarian Tales 49, where we are going to discuss Tales from Tartary. I wanted to introduce you to this book. This is book 2. I'd like to check out book 1, but apparently this was a guy around the 60s, this author, James Riordan, whose family, he married a Tartarian wife and whose grandmother mother had a lot of stories to tell. And he documented them in these tales from Tartary, and a lot of them are similar to old stories that have passed through time, and a lot of them have been repurposed by Disney to make billions, and they never get any credit to their true origin, which I believe, and this guy discovered, was from Tartary. So a lot of these stories are unique. Some of them, again, can tell a little bit about the past and little hints into the past, which are very cool, which only stories can do. And a lot of times you have to decipher between fantasy and reality and kind of take the symbolism in the way that it comes. Like a lot of these stories deal with the Khans and all kinds of different things, giants, demons, all kinds of crazy things that are found throughout. And I wonder if Tartarians were the originators of a lot of these stories, ideas, myths, metaphors, archetypes. Who knows? But it's a cool book from 1979, so I wanted to check it out today. And I'm not going to read an actual story from it. I'm going to save that for another tale, but I wanted to read the ending where it has a commentary on Tartar folk tales, because this is the most informative part. Here's the contents with the stories that are in the book, and they're awesome, and I'm going to go into some of them, definitely. But I wanted to read the commentary, which is found at the end of the book, because it explains a little more information, and that's kind of what we're going for here. You all can read the stories on your own, read them to your children, read them everywhere. But I wanted you to check this part out at the very end, so we can get some insight into where this stuff came from, some of the history, according to this author, and much more, because this guy knew about Tartary in the 70s, and a lot of us didn't find out about it until recently. So let's hear what he has to say. Commentary on Tartar folk tales. A note on Tartary and the Tartars. If I were lord of Tartary, myself and me alone, my bed should be of ivory, of beaten gold my throne. Walter de la Mare, in something called Tartary. So he goes on to say, the author, if indeed you were lord or lady of Tartary, where would we seek your throne of beaten gold, the era of your ivory bed? To find out, we must fly in our time machine to an empire standing like some great giant astride the two continents of Europe and Asia, far vaster than that of ancient Rome, to an age of over 800 years ago, when that first illustrious Tartar Lloyd, Chinggis Khan, sometimes known as Genghis or Genghis Khan, was becoming the greatest conqueror and most feared man in the world. Tartary, the heartland of our stories, may loosely be located in the valleys, plains, and foothills of Central Asia. It lies between the kilometer-and-a-half deep transparent Lake Baikal to the east and the world's largest inland sea, the Caspian, to the west. Its northern border stretches beyond the grassy and wooded steppe of central Russia into the forests of fir and pine that descend to the frozen Arctic Ocean, and in the south its natural backdrop are the mountains of heaven, thrusting their snow-capped peaks 6.5 kilometers into the clouds. The Himalayas and Pamirs are situated in the center of Tartary, flanked by the Tian Shan and Altai to the east, the Hindu Kush and Elbrus to the west. The land within these boundaries is traversed by two great rivers, the Jaxartes or Sir Darya and the Oxus or Amu Darya, both rising in the melting snow of the mountains to the south and wending their way slowly and finally into the Aral Sea. It was along the valleys of these two great rivers and among the foothills of the world's largest mountain range that the culture and commerce of Central Asia took root and blossomed. It was here, too, that the caravans from China to Europe marketed their wares, and to this Mecca came the faithful, making the golden journey to Samarkand, for when all is said and done, death has no repose. This is a poem. Death has no repose, warmer and deeper than that orient sand, which hides the beauty and bright faith of those who made the golden journey to Samarkand, by James Elroy Flecker. Because of the geographical variations, the people of this land led different lives. There were the settled dwellers in the oasis and cities of Samarkand, Tashkent, Bokhara, and Khiva, the setting for several of our tales, the clever brothers, the poor man and his thousand Thanka and Yarensei. There were the inhabitants of the northern forest, busy with their hunting, trapping, fishing, and beekeeping, and living in small semi-nomadic settlements, featured in the stories Shurali, Obderman, and the Beer and the Bees. And finally, there were the pastoral nomads of the plain, who raised horses, sheep, goats, camels, and a few cattle. See the Aldar Ko's Fern Girl and Saran and Umart stories, as well as the Golden Vase. These last nomadic tribes were constantly on the move, pitching their beehive-shaped felt tents or yurtas to the north in summer, where the grass was lush for grazing, and to the south in winter to avoid the heavy northern snowfalls. Since security was vital, for there could be no walls to defend them, they had to be ever vigilant and ready to move on should danger threaten. So who exactly are the Tartars? This is not an easy question to answer, for the early nomads of Central Asia kept few records, partly owing to their enforced mobility. Historically, we know of various nomadic civilizations through their scattered cultural droppings of oral records and artifacts, and now and again a bold, inquisitive explorer from the West would arrive to chronicle events and customs. From such evidence, we may be sure only that in those early days there were many motley tribes wandering this land of terrible storms and biting winds. Every so often, a tough and able leader brought many of these diverse tribes under his will, on occasion leading his armies to greener pastures along the Great Steppe Highway from what is now Mongolia through southern Russia into Central Europe. The conquering might of these nomads was felt from Russia to China, from India to Rome, as, like ripples on a great lake, wave upon wave swept outwards to the west and to the east, Tartar, Mongol, Hun, Scythian, and the rest. The best known of these incursions began around AD 1220, when, from the far end of Asia in the neighborhood of Lake Baikal in the Gobi Desert, a fast-multiplying horde of Tartars descended to overrun the whole of Russia and much besides. They were led by one of the greatest leaders the world has ever known, Chinggis Khan. Perhaps we can see Chinggis Khan's life in better perspective if we know what was happening in England during those same years. When Chinggis was only 12 years old, Thomas A. Becket was returning to England from exile. In 1189, when Genghis Khan was 22, Richard the Lionheart came to the throne, and Richard's brother, King John, signed the Magna Carta 9 years after Genghis Khan had first held his own parliament, the Grand Kurultai. We have to look that up. When Chinggis died at the age of 60 in 1227, King Henry III came of age. In the year 1167 was born a son to Yuksukai Bagadur, chief of a small clan of wandering shepherds known as Yaka Mongols. The son received the name Temuchin, but he was to become known to history as Chinggis Khan, meaning master of the world. When Temuchin was a young man, his tribe, like many others, was subject to a Chinese governor, Ong Khan. Temuchin was only 13 when his father died, poisoned by a rival, and Temuchin himself had to lead the clan. At first described by his clansmen and hunted by enemies while struggling to keep his people together, he gradually built up both fame and power until he had wielded together the entire nomadic peoples of Central Asia. Over a period of some 25 years, Chinggis Khan created a vast empire, sending out on all sides an avalanche of warriors, or raging torrents, as they were known, by those they defeated, aiming at the dominion of the world. It was this multicolored tribal array of horse archers fighting under the standard of the 9 yak tails that was given in the 13th century the name Tartar by their principal foes, the Russians and the Chinese. The Russian Tartarian and the Chinese Tata were words that struck terror in the hearts of Russian and Chinese alike, and with good cause. By the time he died, Chinggis's empire stretched a quarter of the way around the world, from Peking to the Black Sea. Not long after, in 1258, his successors embraced Islam as their faith and the Tartar Turkic language as their common tongue, as cultural cement to bind together the many tribes and clans that made up the Golden Horde. Chinggis's descendants extended the empire even further. In that area of the world that concerns us, the great Russian plain in Central Asia, Chinggis's son and successor, Ogodei, granted to a nephew, Batu, the entire Russian territory from the Urals to the Dnieper River, with an enormous host of 300,000 men. Batu annihilated the kingdom of the Bulgars on the river Volga in 1236 and thrust forward all the way to Hungary, Poland, and the Adriatic Sea. Many are the tales and legends told of these brave and fierce Tartars. To be sure, it is often hard to unravel fact from fiction. 2 Italian friars, Plano Carpini and Rubruchis, who journeyed eastward 6 years after Russia's submission, described the ruined cities of Russia as being full of skulls and skeletons. Yet on visiting the Tartars, the friars wrote that they were struck by the complete docility of the men and women. They never seemed to quarrel among themselves. All the same, after 40 years of victorious war, like most conquerors, they seem to despise other peoples and believe themselves destined to fulfill their leader's command to rule the world, not unlike the Romans in an earlier period or the British in a later one. It is said they showed no pity in battle, quoting a saying of Genghis Khan that regret is the fruit of pity. In the old Russian city of Vladimir, the entire princely family, priests and townsfolk, were burned to death in the cathedral in which they had taken refuge. To be fair to the Tartars, it must be said that this was done at the instigation of a rival Russian prince, brother to the Prince of Vladimir. Yet after a major battle, when the Tartars won the Russian capital, Kiev, all the Russian princes of that area and their families were rounded up. The Tartars were then said to have built a huge banqueting table on top of their captives and feasted above them, crushing them to death. Notwithstanding their legends as savagery, often embroidered upon by their foes, the Tartars were a hardy, courageous, and cultivated people. The Venetian traveler Marco Polo, who lived in Tartary for 17 years from 1275 to 92 in the service of the famous Tartar Emperor Kublai Khan, wrote that the Tartars could live for a month on nothing but mare's milk, from which they made a kind of porridge. If without other food, they would draw blood from their own veins. They could stay on horseback for 2 days at a time and sleep while their horses grazed. During their campaigns, each man took about 18 horses with him, riding them in turn. For over 200 years, the Tartar Golden Horde dominated Russia until the Tartar yoke was thrown off by the armies of the Russian Tsar, Ivan the Terrible, which sacked the Tartar stronghold of Kazan in 1480. Soon afterwards, the Golden Horde broke up, scattering pockets of Tartars about the Russian land, but mainly forming separate Tartar states or khanates in Central Asia. Today, Kazan is the capital of Tartarstan, the autonomous Tartar republic within the USSR in which half of the 5 million Tartars live. The other two major Tartar groups are to be found in southern Siberia and the Crimea. All these Tartars speak a common language with and are related to the peoples of the 5 Soviet republics of Central Asia, Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstan, Kazakhstan, Turkmenia, and Tajikistan, which now occupy the land of Tartary, from which our stories come. A poem says, "What shall we tell you? Tales, marvelous tales, of ships and stars and isles where good men rest, where never more the rose of sunset pales, and winds and shadows fall toward the west." James Elroy Flecker in The Golden Journey to Samarkand. This next session says, "Tales the Tartars told. Tartar folklore is washed by a mighty ocean of oriental influences, rich in sensuous fantasies and legends that were already old when Europe lay in cultural darkness. The Tartar, like the Arab, has at his command a full and poetical language which affords him a host of synonyms and similes to gloss over the roguish wit of the Russian peasant or the homely jest of the Anglo-Saxon villain. This is best expressed in the enormous number of songs, tales, and sayings in which popular wit enlivens events and people with humor smites with satire or boldly holds up to laughter. It is this sparkling liveliness, inventiveness, and downright cunning, which with gold and with likeness of all that is beautiful on earth, and also 4 pipes, one flowing with wine, one with milk, one with honey, and one with water. There were fair damsels, the loveliest in the world, unrivaled at playing every sort of instrument and at singing and dancing. Aladdin gave his men to understand that this garden was paradise. At the entrance stood a fortress so strong that its inhabitants feared no army, and there was no other way in except through this fortress. Into this garden the sheik would introduce carefully picked young men from the country around, having first rendered them insensible with hashish, the drug which gave them their name Hashashin, or assassins, in other words, hashish takers. When the young men awoke in the garden, they were convinced they had died and were in paradise, particularly as the lovely maiden stayed with them all the while, singing and making music for their delight, and ministering to their every desire. So these young men had all they could wish for, and asked nothing better than to remain there. But the old man of the mountains had other plans for them. When he wanted emissaries to send on some mission of murder, he would administer the drug to as many as he pleased, and while they slept, he had them carried into his palace and locked in a dark dungeon. When they came to, they were sure they had indeed been in paradise, and their only wish was to return there. The old man would tell them that he had the means of sending them back, and would dispatch them on some dangerous mission of murder or assassination. The young men were filled with such a great desire to return to this paradise that they longed for death, which would enable them to get there. In this ingenious manner, the old man built up a band of dedicated killers who cared not whether they died and whose ruthlessness made them the scourge of the entire area. Thus it happened, says Marco Polo, that no one ever escaped when the sheik wanted his death, and many kings and lords paid tribute to him and cultivated his friendship for fear that he might bring about their end. But Chinggis Khan's grandson, Hulagu, knowing of all the evil deeds of the sheik and making up his mind that he should be crushed, besieged him in his fortress of Alamut for 3 years and in the end captured and killed him. After their defeat by Hulagu, the Ismailis, as the old man's sect now called themselves, went into hiding and continued to carry out well-planned assassinations to obtain land and riches from frightened rulers. With the passage of time, the activities of the Ismailis became more respectable, and today they take their lead from the Aga Khan, head of the Ismaili sect and direct descendant of the old man of the mountains, Aladdin. Whew, didn't tell you that in the Disney story. Features of this story are clearly to be found in proud Ilbatir in the land of Cathay. The Great Wall alluded to in Ilbatir is the Great Wall of China, Cathay being the name used by Marco Polo for China, and the wall having been built originally to keep out the marauding Tartars. It was Hulagu's brother, the famous Kublai Khan, who became the first Tartar or barbarian to rule over the whole of China. Elements of the tale of the Kurai, as of several Tartar tales, are symbolic. One such is the roll made with human milk. The person who eats it becomes the son of the hero's mother or wife, or his milk brother. The horn in this story has a sinister ring, as also in the tale of the 3 talismans. Though generally an oriental myth, the horn is a symbol of superhuman power, virility, and good fortune. When the bearer loses his horn or tusk, he, like Samson, shorn of his hair, forfeits his great power and strength. In the story of the Kurai, however, these elements seem to be merely trappings, embellishing the main theme, to explain the origin of the flute-like instrument popular among several Tartar peoples, particularly the Bashkirs. Water has a magical significance in a number of tales, as it generally does in folklore. In Abzalil, in the Master of the Lake, the waters of the lake are guarded by an evil giant, master of the horses of the lake. In Altin Saka, of which many versions exist, the great lake is watched over by the hideous witch, Ubir, whose steed is summoned from the lake. In Shaitan the devil and his 40 daughters, a white swan is seized by a black witch on a lake. To the superstitious Tartar mind, water represented the netherworld, inhabited by the souls of the departed. The evil force guarding the watery depths is the watchman over the kingdom of the dead, keeping their peace and punishing any intruder. The dead awaken from their slumbers, take on the forms of horses. In some Tartars' tales, the pagan Shaitan has become Iblis, who, according to the Quran, had been an angel whom Allah had created from fire, but then expelled from paradise for his misdemeanors. As with all folk tales, many Tartar stories have their origin in actual history, recounted and embroidered down the ages by the Tartar sezens, or jesters, by grandmothers and other such counts of oral wisdom. These tales are not, we must remember, archaeological remains. They are living things, not fossils. They expand and shrink on their journey down the years. All the same, they tell us something of the history of the people. They reflect their feats and suspicions, their ideals of beauty and honor. The Tartar tales have been shaped and indelibly etched by the climate, the terrain, the feuds with other tribes, the social order, the mixture of ancient myth, Mohammedan faith, and mystical images from other religions that cross their path. My own introduction to Tartar folklore has a ring of fantasy about it. One chill February evening some years ago when I was working in Moscow, a knock came at the door of my apartment. The door opened to reveal a young girl, dark-haired, almond-eyed, a proud daughter of Tartary. She had journeyed from Bashkiria, it turned out, to visit her Kyrgyz cousin, who had occupied the apartment before me. Finally, she located her relative and subsequently acted as my guide and interpreter on tours of Central Asia, Bashkiria, and Tartarstan. It was from some of her hospitable elders in Tartar, alls beside the river Baili, that over the traditional fish head and frothy mare's milk given to honored guests, I jotted down versions of a number of these tales, like Al-Karkoz, Shurali, Abzalil, and Kurai, and now and then I also had the good fortune to disturb the dusty slumbers of books of legends on shelves of Tartar cottages. It is from these main sources and from the lips of my Tartar wife, for so my guide became, and mother-in-law, that the stories in this first English collection of Tartar folk tales are taken. Wow. That is James Riordan, in the end section of this incredible book, Tales from Tartary, with an absolutely amazing history that he just provided us. This makes me think of a lot of different things, and one of the main things it made me think of was that just how these controllers have zero creativity on their own. It seems like all the stories that we grew up with and that they brought after that last reset in the 1900s were just pillaged from everywhere. And you always hear about Genghis Khan, the Mongols, all this stuff. You never hear the word Tartars. Why do they keep it out? This history is so interesting and so necessary to come back into the swing. And just because one of the main things we need to find is why. Why did they want this civilization gone and eradicated so much? They repurposed all their stories into so many different things. They make so much money off it. They'll never give it credit. They have other people taking the credit for the artists. And it's the same as now. There's just so many forces out there that succeed from pillaging people that are creative, while the humble creatives are just happy being able to create. And these hounds that beckon at them and rip off their creativity and purge it and do everything they can to bury the actual creative master, while these business savvy just parasites end up doing everything they can and taking the credit for it. It's like how they steal art from everywhere and sell it everywhere else in other countries. They do so many different things. It's just more and more of the same. And it points to these controllers and the people in charge being so uncreative. And you see it on the news. You see it ever since the Obama era, when creativity took a drastic decline in the world. And there hasn't been any good movies, barely any music no music that's been popular. All underground music has been good, but there's been never a drop of popular music that isn't programmable, CIA created nonsense. Same with the movies, Netflix, Disney, the Oscars, they don't even exist. Culture has never been in such a terrible point. There are no rock stars, there are no really good creative authors. It's pretty pathetic. If you're good, chances are you're not going to be heard by the masses because some other D-bag is going to take your credit and get a lot more money because he has an agenda to push. And chances are, those people, if they do succeed in something, it's because they ripped off something else from the past and didn't give it credit. So it's just really nuts how how creatives push the world, how creatives could be, a distant just heroes. They could be the masters of the ancient world, the shamans of the creative path, but they get pillaged constantly. And this is, again, more proof of that, as you can see these stories. I definitely recommend taking a look at them, reading some in the book, read them to your kids, take a look at them, see if you can find some insight, see what you can dig and find out that is related to what we know of today or has been purged from what we know today and altered and changed. But it's good that this guy preserved it. It's good also to see a Tartarian Tales from the 70s that's talking about the ancient past, but in a way that we didn't know. And this guy really did have an amazing insight, great synchronicity that led him to his wife when he was in Moscow at that time. That's kind of divine. And that brings us here today to finish off and close the circle here. So I hope you all enjoy the book. Take a look at the link, and bless you all.